He abandoned her while she was pregnant and laughed when she tried to build a home with her bare hands. Landon Foster, the wealthy rancher, was certain she would break and come crawling back. But fate had other plans. A quiet ally stepped in and turned the tables in a way he never saw coming. And just wait until you hear how this story ends with justice finally served. Emily Harper's breath came in short, uneven bursts as she pressed her hand against the curve of her stomach. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the clearing, but it did little to warm the chill crawling up her spine. She stood on uneven ground, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth where grass had been trampled under her own determined steps. Before her lay a stack of rough-cut lumber, salvaged nails, and a borrowed hammer. It didn't look like much, not to the people watching her from a distance anyway, but to Emily, it was everything. They had laughed at her at Miller's General Store that morning. She had felt their eyes on her back as she paid for a second-hand handsaw and a pack of work gloves, too large for her small hands. Their whispers weren't quiet enough. Does she really think she can build a cabin out there? She's 8 months along. Maybe she's trying to prove something to him. Poor girl, she'll never last a week. Emily had kept her chin high, though her cheeks burned hot with humiliation. She knew what they said about her, that she was reckless, that she'd brought all this on herself, that Landon Foster, the wealthy rancher who fathered her unborn child, had been right to walk away. But none of them had seen her kneeling alone in a drafty trailer at midnight, counting out crumpled bills that wouldn't even cover next month's rent. None of them had held her hair back as she fought waves of nausea, whispering to the tiny life within her that they'd be okay somehow. Now, standing at the edge of the clearing she had claimed as her own, Emily gripped the hammer until her knuckles whitened. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, and yet there was a quiet fire in her chest. She had no blueprint, no crew, and no help, but she had resolve. She dropped to her knees and began marking the foundation lines with string and stakes. Each strike of the hammer into the soft earth felt like a challenge to the voices in town, a challenge to Landon himself, who had told her she was too fragile, too inexperienced, too alone to make it without him. As the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched long across the clearing, Emily worked until her arms trembled. Splinters pierced her palms, and sweat dampened the collar of her shirt. She paused only once to rest, pressing a hand to her stomach, when a small kick reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered hoarsely. "We're going to have a home. I don't care what it takes." Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled and faded, carrying with it the laughter of men heading back to their ranches. But Emily didn't look up. She planted another stake, shoulders stiff with determination. This wasn't about proving herself to them. It wasn't even about Landon anymore. This was about survival, about showing her child a world where strength wasn't measured in wealth or reputation, but in grit and love. By nightfall, the first outlines of the cabin's footprint lay traced in the earth. To anyone else, it was nothing but a rough rectangle. To Emily, it was a promise. Emily's hands were raw by the end of the first week. Blisters bloomed across her palms like angry welts. Some split open and stung with every movement, but she wrapped them in strips of old cloth and kept going. Each day started before the sun crested the horizon, her breath clouding in the chilly dawn as she hauled lumber piece by piece to the clearing. Her stomach, round and heavy, strained against her worn flannel shirt, and every step felt like wading through mud. The townsfolk's whispers had grown louder now. At Miller's General Store, she heard them even as they pretended to speak in hushed tones. "She's going to get herself hurt. It's reckless what she's doing. Or maybe she's hoping Landon will come back and save her from this mess." Emily didn't flinch. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. By the fourth day, the skeletal beginnings of the cabin stood upright. A few uneven posts anchored in the ground, lashed together with nails she'd scavenged from broken crates. It was far from perfect, but it was hers. Every hammer strike echoed through the empty clearing like a war drum. Then came the first storm. Dark clouds rolled in without warning, churning across the sky with a low growl. Emily worked faster, her hammer swinging with frantic energy as fat raindrops splattered the ground. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face until she could hardly see. She tried to brace the frame with spare boards, but her strength was waning. A sudden crack split the air as one of the corner posts wrenched free, crashing to the ground. Emily stumbled backward, landing hard on the wet earth. For a moment, she just sat there in the mud, rain plastering her clothes to her skin. Her throat tightened as tears mingled with the rain. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Maybe I can't do this." But then she felt it, a faint but steady kick against her ribcage. The baby. Her baby. She pressed her hands over her stomach and drew in a shaky breath. Number she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a wreck of broken boards and scattered nails. Emily stood among the debris, shoulders hunched, but eyes burning with quiet defiance. She began again. That evening, as she wrestled a heavy beam into place, she didn't notice the black pickup truck idling at the edge of the clearing. The driver watched in silence as Emily strained, her face pale with effort. The beam slipped from her grip and slammed to the ground, narrowly missing her boots. She bent down to lift it again, refusing to give in to the fatigue creeping through her limbs. The truck's door opened with a creak. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep this up." Emily froze. She didn't have to turn to recognize the voice, smooth, rich, and laced with mockery. Landon Foster. He leaned casually against the doorframe, hat tilted low to shield his eyes from the setting sun. Even in work clothes, he looked every bit the polished ranch owner, boots spotless despite the mud. "I thought I'd stop by, see how my charity case was doing," he said, his eyes flicked to her stomach. "Or should I say, our charity case?" Emily's fingers curled into fists. She straightened slowly, meeting his gaze. "I don't need your charity," she said, her voice calm but firm. Landon's smirk deepened. "Come now, Emily. You're out here playing builder while carrying my child. That's not independence. It's desperation. Take my offer. Move into the main house. I'll take care of you. And the baby. All you have to do is sign custody over when the time comes. You can stay on as a guest." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, heavy as a storm cloud. "Leave." The word came out sharper than she intended. Landon raised a brow but didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "This fantasy of yours, it's going to break you." Emily didn't reply. She turned back to the fallen beam, gritted her teeth, and lifted it. The strain sent a flash of pain up her spine, but she didn't let go. When she looked up again, the truck was gone. That night, Emily lay awake on the cold ground of her makeshift tent, cradling her belly. Her body ached, her hands throbbed, but her mind was clear. She wasn't building just a cabin. She was building a life, for herself and for the tiny heart beating beneath her ribs. The sound of splitting wood echoed through the clearing like a sharp crack of defiance. Emily's arms trembled as she swung the hatchet again, sweat dripping into her eyes despite the cool autumn air. The cabin frame had finally taken shape, a fragile skeleton of timber and nails that stood like a stubborn declaration against the doubts whispered in town. But her supplies were running low, her body was nearing its limits, and the nights had grown bitterly cold. Each morning she awoke on the hard earth, joints stiff, muscles sore, and yet she pushed forward. She had no one else to lean on, and every hour of labor was a step closer to proving she didn't need Landon, or anyone. But then came the night the wind changed. It started with a low howl through the trees. The branches swayed violently as a storm gathered overhead. Emily, inside the half-framed cabin, braced a corner post with all her weight, her heart pounding in her ears. The roofless frame groaned under the force of the gale, and she felt the wooden supports shifting beneath her hands. "No, not now. Please hold," she whispered through gritted teeth. The wind roared louder. A board ripped loose and clattered to the ground, narrowly missing her feet. She stumbled, catching herself against a beam as another gust tore through the clearing. And then it happened. With a deafening snap, the main support beam cracked, collapsing in a spray of splinters. Emily fell backward onto the wet earth, her breath knocked from her lungs. She lay there for a moment, staring at the broken remains of her work. Rain began to pour, soaking her hair, her clothes, the ground beneath her. She curled her arms around her stomach, holding her baby protectively as tears streamed down her face. "I can't do this," she whispered into the night. "I thought I could, but I can't." The sound of an engine broke through the storm. At first, she thought it was Landon again, coming to gloat over her failure. But the headlights were dimmer, and the truck that rolled to a stop was older, its paint faded from years of hard use. A tall man stepped out, his boots squelching in the mud. His coat was worn at the cuffs, his hat pulled low against the rain. Emily squinted through the downpour, gripping a nearby plank like a shield. "Who's there?" she called, her voice hoarse. "Name's Cole Rivers," he said simply. "I work for Landon. I was heading back from the south pasture when I saw the light from your lantern." Emily's shoulders stiffened. "If you're here on his orders, I'm not." Cole's voice cut through the storm, calm and steady. "I came because I saw what you're doing, because no one else around here seems to care." Emily hesitated. She had heard of Cole Rivers. People in town said he was Landon's right hand, a man who kept his head down and did his work. They also said he wasn't one for taking sides. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "This isn't your fight." Cole glanced at the collapsed frame, then back at her. "Maybe it isn't, but you've got fire, Miss Harper, and I hate seeing a good fight go to waste." Emily looked away, ashamed of the tears still clinging to her lashes. "I don't need pity," she said. "This isn't pity. It's an offer." He took a careful step forward, hands open. "You're trying to raise walls with nothing but willpower and a hammer. I've built cabins before. I know what it takes." Emily shook her head. "I can't pay you. I can barely afford supplies." "I'm not asking for pay." "Then why?" Cole's gaze softened, though his expression remained unreadable. "Because I can't stand by and watch Landon make a fool of you. And because maybe I've had enough of following orders from a man like him." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in weeks, the tight band of despair around her chest loosened slightly. Tomorrow," Cole said, turning back toward his truck. "At first light. If you want my help, I'll be here." He climbed into the cab and drove off, leaving only tire tracks in the mud and the faint glow of his taillights vanishing into the trees. Emily sat there in the rain long after he'd gone, her thoughts a whirlpool of fear, doubt, and a tiny flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Emily woke to the sound of boots on frosted grass. Pulling her coat tight, she stepped out of the tent to see Cole standing there, hat low, a quiet resolve in his eyes. "You came back," she said, her voice uncertain. "I said I would." He glanced at the half-collapsed frame. "We've got work to do." They worked in near silence that day, the only sounds the creak of wood and steady hammer blows. Cole moved with practiced ease, showing Emily how to brace beams properly and reinforce weak spots. When her hands trembled, he reached out to steady a plank, not with pity, but with calm assurance. By sunset, the frame stood again, stronger than before. They sat on a low beam, watching the sky burn orange. Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the weight in her chest lighten for the first time in weeks. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "Maybe not," Cole replied, eyes on the horizon, "but some fights are worth standing in." Emily felt the baby shift and placed a hand over her stomach. A small smile touched her lips. For the first time, she believed she might win this fight. Spersit ChatGPT. The cabin stood complete at last, its wooden walls sturdy against the early winter winds. Inside, the air was warm from the crackling fire, and faint traces of pine still lingered from freshly cut beams. Emily sat in a rocking chair near the hearth, her newborn son asleep in her arms. His tiny hand curled instinctively around her finger, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. She had done it. Against every doubt, every whispered word in town, every storm that had threatened to tear her work apart, she had built this home. The sound of tires crunching over the frozen ground pulled her back to the present. She stood, heart racing, as headlights swept across the window. Outside, a sleek black truck rolled to a stop, its polished surface out of place in the rugged clearing. Landon stepped out, his boots pristine despite the muddy path. He looked around the clearing, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "So this is it," he said, his voice sharp. "Your grand achievement." Emily held her baby closer, her jaw tightening. "You should leave, Landon," she said calmly. He took a step closer, his gaze flicking to the cabin, then to Cole, who had emerged from around the side with a protective edge to his stance. "You're making a mistake, Emily," Landon warned. "You can't do this alone. And you think he's going to stay? He works for me. He'll walk away the moment this gets hard." "I don't think," Emily said firmly. "I know. Cole stayed when no one else did, and I don't need saving. Not from you, not from anyone." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the cold air. Landon's jaw tightened, but seeing no victory to claim, he turned and strode back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and soon the sound faded into the distance. Emily let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cole stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with quiet pride. "You stood your ground," he said. "So did you." Together, they stood in the doorway of the cabin as snow began to fall. Inside, the firelight glowed warm and steady, a symbol of everything they had built, not just walls and a roof, but a life founded on strength, resilience, and the promise of something new.